So this past weekend, this movie came out. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Black Panther. It's called Black Panther, right?
Yeah, I think that's the one I went and saw.
Yeah. Apparently, it's set the all-time record for weekend opening in February, and it's the number one highest rated movie on Rotten Tomatoes.
Black Panther.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
It's one of
yeah.
those Marvel
Yeah,
thingies like Iron Man
yeah.
or Captain America.
It's not something about a galaxy or a world or a uh, Marvel
In a world.
Marvel videographic galaxy something. I don't know. It was fantastic. I loved that movie.
I loved it too, actually. Yeah. So we're gonna talk about why it was great, why you should think it's great, and why you're wrong if you don't think it's great. I'm gonna pour this beer, and then we're gonna talk about it.
Welcome back to the second draft.
Welcome back to the second draft. So I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I had high expectations, and I kind of was hoping some bad reviews would come out to kind of temper them and kind of reduce my excitement a little bit, because I almost felt like I was going to be disappointed seeing this movie. Not the case, man. All the reviews are right, and it's maybe the
Yeah.
first time you can say that without hesitation about a Marvel movie. I'm somebody who's seen like all 18, 19 of these things, and for the most part liked all of them, aside from maybe Spider-Man Homecoming, and you should, or maybe just not watch my Spider-Man Homecoming video that I recorded when we started doing this. But yeah, Black Panther is legit.
Yeah, people always talk about those first couple days when there's that ramp on Rotten Tomatoes where people are talking about, oh, this movie's incredible, and then by 2 or 3 days later, it's slumped considerably. You're not going to see that with this movie. I think it instantly landed for me in my top like 3, I would say, Marvel movies.
Yeah.
Right alongside Iron Man, which I still think is a rock solid Marvel movie, and Guardians of the Galaxy is another one of my favorites. So those are probably my top 3. Black Panther was just really, really well put together.
Yeah. So a little bit of backstory about this movie. The director and the writer, Ryan Coogler, was the kid who did Fruitvale Station with Michael B. Jordan. He did Creed, which was the follow-up and kind of the reboot of the Rocky Balboa franchise, starring the illegitimate son of Apollo Creed. So just to give you a little sense of who Ryan Coogler is, he grew up watching the Rocky movies, and he desperately wanted to make one. So what he did was he wrote a script, and then he shopped the script around, and he convinced the studio to make it, even though like the franchise had pretty much all been done at that point. So he approaches Stallone, and Stallone had just done Rocky V and Rocky Balboa, and he's like, "Oh, the franchise is done. I'm not going to do any more of these movies." And Ryan's like, "Let's sit down, read the script." And Stallone, who is Rocky Balboa, is his baby. Like, he won an Academy Award for the original movie. He wrote that shit. I mean, that's his thing. And he read the script, and he comes back and says, "I'm going to do this movie." So Ryan Coogler knows his shit. He knows how to wheel and deal. He knows how to get shit done, and that's exactly what he did with this movie. He, within like the constraints and the confines of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I'm sure some boundaries imposed by Disney and Marvel, he told a very succinct and surprising story for what this movie is and what this franchise is. The kid is at Dynamo, and I think he's like 31 years old.
Yeah, he's young, and the talent is just, it shows just if you look at the legend, you know, like you look at his marks on his list, it's pretty incredible. You take a arguable like Sundance shoe-in like B movie, indie movie, and make it something incredible out of that with a really like tight, concise script, and then you move on into something that has been arguably run down over the course of however many years, with repeated remakes and just trope-laden characters, and you know, I feel like at some point they lost sight of the original point of Rocky, and it kind of like devolved into a few scenes were worth watching in Rocky 5, but not the whole movie, you know.
Right.
But then you take that and flip it on its end and make Creed. Creed was incredible. I loved
Creed
that
was
movie.
fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. Stallone had a great performance, like dynamite performance, and just the entire thing got you invested in new characters while still living the mythos and the kind of story behind some of the most important characters from the franchise. That's incredible. Now take that a step further, Marvel Cinematic Universe, you've got Disney is involved now. Daddy Disney does not want you to screw up their baby, which is just churning out money and props and whatever the hell else. They're going to be selling Black Panther memorabilia at Christmas time.
Oh my god!
Because this movie was so impactful in February. It broke all the February records for the box office, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
And yeah, Coogler is just incredible. I can't say enough, especially just with she's got a spotless clean record right now. As far as the directorial kind of aspect goes, and absolutely. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens next. What is he going to churn out?
Yeah, I am. To quote Palpatine in the Phantom Menace, I'm going to watch the future of his career with great interest. Yeah, I mean, the kid is this young. He's a wonder kid. He's just knocking it out of the park. And like what you're saying about what he did with the Apollo or the Rocky franchise, where he kind of turned it on its ear and came up with a fresh, whole new take and revitalized the franchise. A lot of people were kind of feeling the superhero fatigue, like the superhero movement fatigue up to this point, and now all of a sudden everybody's just going absolutely berserk over Black Panther. And again, it's a good cause because it does feel familiar. It does very much fit itself into the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it's also such a unique and interesting take, and it's got more of a bite and an edge to it than we've seen. It's probably the original Iron Man, really. It's got a lot to say. So yeah.
It does. It's a great study in storytelling. And I think your Freudian slip proves that, just because you said the Apollo story, and
right.
and in my mind I'm going, well, that's the point though. That's the point, is because he takes something familiar, and that's what people love. If you ask me about, I could talk about storytelling all day, but what people really want to see when they read a new book or they watch a new movie is they want to see something moderately familiar, which is why people consistently go back to tropes. They want to see something moderately familiar, but they also want to see something added to that. They want to see something new. Right. And so when you take Creed, for instance, you take Apollo, who people know, they're familiar with from the first a couple movies, and then you just you take that as a microcosm, and then you just expand on it. It's still within the same universe. That world is still fleshed out fully, but now you get to expand on it, and you get to explore all of the parts that you haven't seen yet. And that's what's fun to people who are ingesting a new story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I guess we should at this point warn everybody that there will be spoilers in this video. And, if you haven't seen the movie yet, what the hell are you doing? Go see it. This is not one of those things where it's like Star Wars, where like 50% of the people liked it and they're the vocal majority, and it's not going to be that great. No, like it's actually, it's not just a fun, really well-made comic book movie. It's honestly kind of an important and relevant movie for what's going on in the world today. So we may as well jump right into the story going on with Killmonger, the villain, who I think is quite honestly my favorite Marvel villain to date. I think he even tops the likes of like Loki and Hela, I think.
Yeah, in terms of being a true villain, I think Loki borders on the villain, but also somewhat helpful at times. Can dip his toes into the good side every now and then, as we saw in a few of those Marvel movies. I loved Michael B. Jordan in this movie. The antagonist was just great. People talk about in terms of when you learn storytelling, when you learn script writing, screenwriting, you learn just like the craft of creative writing in general. They talk about the antagonist and how difficult it is, because everyone wants to make their antagonist the direct opposite of the protagonist and make them kind of this big bad. They are often called the big bad.
Right. And
the hard part, and what they try to teach you when you're learning these things, is to make that villain relatable, to make that person a person. There might be the biggest, baddest villain in the world, but they still really love animals, and they're an animal conservationist, and they're going to be. That's a really lame example, but when you look at this story in particular, Killmonger, you understand his backstory, and when you understand his backstory, you understand his motivation.
Yeah.
And that is the trick. When you understand the antagonist's motivation, it makes the story that much more believable, and you don't know in the critical moments whether or not you should be rooting for them, because you get a glimpse, and you do root for the antagonist, and then eventually something changes in their psyche or something changes in their motivation, and that elevates them to the kind of adult level. And if you don't understand that, that's what makes them the antagonist, because there's always polarity in our world. And I think this movie was trying to get at that polarity, was trying to get at that, especially the social polarity in our world.
Yeah, and like you said, there was a major, like a polarity between T'Challa, Black Panther, and the villain Killmonger. And again, we're going to go heavily into spoilers, so if you haven't seen the movie, go watch the movie right now and then come back and watch this. The idealism of Wakanda and the fear of the outside world corrupting it and destroying what they've basically been able to freely build forever since the dawn of humanity. And also the opposite of that, and the fact that they are very incredibly selfish by holding back all that technology and all of those ideologies and shit from the rest of the world. And then Killmonger seeing the evil of being so xenophobic and seeing so selfish and saying, F that, I'm going to take everything that Wakanda's got, I'm going to ship it all out to the world, I'm going to empower black people, and black people are going to take over, because Wakanda has been sitting inside this bubble and it's just allowed all these horrible things to happen to black people for centuries. Holy shit, that's a synopsis for a Marvel movie? Like,
yeah.
Well done, Ryan Coogler. Like, and it's not overly preachy or heavy-handed with that message, but it's there in plain view, and it's equal parts brilliant, and I don't want to say shocking, but just surprising that like Disney was like, okay, let's make this movie in this day and age with everything that's going on in the world. It's an important movie, both the message about what Wakanda is doing wrong, and also Killmonger's warped perception of wanting to push it the exact opposite and go the exact opposite, because he was broken from an early age. He's seen the oppression and everything that's happened to black people all through the centuries, and you do sympathize with him because he grew up in, I think he grew up in like Compton or Oakland or something.
Oakland, yeah.
And his father was killed by was killed by Wakanda, and they left him. They just deserted him. They left him to fend for himself at a very young age. So he joins the military, and he becomes a specialist in subverting and destroying governments and creating uprisings. And everything he's doing is him building himself up, both mentally and physically, to go back to Wakanda and say, F you guys, you got it all wrong. Look what you've done to the world by being so selfish and staying in your bubble. It's time to pop that bubble and take over. Like, damn.
Yeah, it's a lot. And I feel like my biggest point of contention with the movie, if I was going to try to critique it, I have to dig deep for that, first of all, which I think says something. Yeah. And further than that, I have to know something about the structure of storytelling in order to dig that deep. Mm-hmm. I heard somebody recently, like a creator that I very much admire, talk about if you do not, as a creator, as a storyteller, as a writer or whatever, project your beliefs onto the page or onto the screen and what you want to have accomplished, then you're not doing it properly. And if you think that you're trying to subvert that, then you're incorrect, because no matter what you put on the page, some message is getting put across regardless.
Sure, of course.
And so that being said, one of the things that when I was digging deep into it was that I didn't like the aspect that they were very much pushing there's this heavy, like, gun control kind of backbone to it. And, for me, growing up, I grew up in Colorado when we experienced our first lockdown with Columbine, and I was there 20 minutes away during the Dark Knight Rises incident, and like all of those things have made me very, very keen on these kind of messages, right? Because I pay attention to these kind of things. Mm-hmm. That being said, it stood out to me that you have this villain that grew up in a crime-ridden area, that went into the military and understands the harm that these guns can cause, and then still was willing to advocate spreading weaponry out to the entire world. And I think there's a validity to saying, let's share the technology of Wakanda. Let's share the intelligence that we have, that we've withheld from the world. Let's get rid of the xenophobia. Let's get rid of this like seclusion and share our knowledge and our wealth, but not necessarily let's just share our guns so that they can have an uprising. And I thought it was a very overtly political message, which maybe some people need to see. But if I'm digging deep, it was one of the like burrs for me that I was did a little twitch.
It was overtly political. It is also a little bit on the nose and very relevant for what's going on in the world today. But I do feel like Killmonger's motivation was consistent and very thought out all the way through. To your point, he was born out of violence, and then he grew up in violence, and the violence became empowering to him because it was a way of control. So I do get what you're saying, like the fact that he was born of violence. He did see all this violence firsthand when he was in the military, when he was an operative and whatnot. But it's not contrary to his beliefs. His beliefs are that the violence is the means to an end, which has honestly been true of a lot of revolutionary leaders throughout history. So it's realistic, I think. He wasn't somebody that was like an altruistic soldier who had like a weird change of conscience or something. He was somebody who went into the military deliberately with the goal of revenge. Like everything that he went into the military to learn and achieve was to fulfill his ability to exact revenge on Wakanda for what they did to his family and for what he believes they've done to the rest of the world. So what he's seeing is like an eye for an eye type of situation where he's seen black people be oppressed and be brutalized throughout the centuries, and he believes it's now time for Wakanda, with him as the king, to arm those same people and bring them up and turn the tables and be the superiors for once. So I thought it was very consistent. He's a sympathetic character, but he's not somebody who's got like... He's not the type of character who would have seen violence and thought, oh, this is the wrong way of doing it. He would have seen it as like, we've absorbed all this violence, let's dish some out, which is realistic. And also, I mean, it's a good catalyst for a villain as well, but I thought it was realistic. It didn't turn me off in terms of, the storytelling and the villain. I thought it was very honest, really. So
yeah, and all that to say, I still find him to be the most relatable villain in Marvel. Sure. That I fully understand where he's coming from with I think there's like a poetic justice to that. Like people talk about, the concept of for the greater good, and those kind of villains are pretty popular. And if you dig deep and try to boil it down, that's kind of what he's getting at, is that eventually you'd get to the point where the conquerors that are Wakanda under his power would eventually be able to create a more hospitable, create a more utopian kind of world with their technology after they enforce their violence. And so I'm not saying that I don't understand his motivation. I think that was valid. Mm-hmm. Altogether, I think when you look at it, the conflict is escalated because you take something very personal, which was family. Mm-hmm. His relationship with his father, and then his father's relationship with the royal line in Wakanda, and then you mix that in with politics, and it just gets wild. And right. I think that Coogler probably had a lot of fun in the drawing room playing around with what's going to happen when this throne when T'Challa is dethroned, because he's now sitting in this uncomfortable room and he has one, maybe two potential supporters in the room with him, and he's gonna outright right there in that scene tell us what his mission is and what his values are, right? Which was great to see, because it's typically in a superhero movie like this, in a Marvel movie, if you ever hear the villain's kind of mission and values, it really boils down to them monologuing, and it's really boring. And
which was a serious problem with Age of Ultron.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't get that in this because it's valid. It's an aphora kind of, because you see the same scene pan out that T'Challa was just doing. Where he's consulting with his council, and now Killmonger's in there and he's saying the things to the council about his values. And at the very end of the movie too, you see T'Challa walk back in spoilers, into the room, and it's only 3 or 4 seconds, but it's a very important scene to show because he's taking that power back and he's reasserting the values that he has into the political realm of Wakanda.
Right.
So it was very important. I'm really glad that I saw that right at the end.
Yeah, and I love the fact that T'Challa goes through that whole discovery that Wakanda being so xenophobic has been absolutely detrimental and just damaging to the world, not just for black people, but for people in general. And it took the other extreme of Killmonger for him to recognize that and decide that there's got to be some sort of a middle ground. Like, Wakanda's got to join the global community. Like, it's wrong for them to just be xenophobic and be closed off from the rest of the world. But at the same time, it's not right for them to go and arm them, you know? So they've got to... Yeah. I'm excited to see what the Marvel Cinematic Universe does with the character moving forward. Beyond just, like, Infinity War, I think they've got a dynamite franchise on their hand. I hope Coogler sticks around and keeps making more Black Panther movies. But, yeah.
And another... One of the... And I'm just gonna. I can rave about this movie for ages and ages, but another one of the things that really stuck out to me that I loved was when it was revealed that I'm gonna forget his name, but T'Challa's father, the former king, actually killed T'Chaka. Yeah, I think that's right.
T'Chaka.
When he kills his brother, and he confronts him. You know, when T'Challa finally confronts him in the kind of dreamscape world that is the I don't even know how to describe it. Yeah, ancestral plane. Thank you. I forgot the name. And he's confronting his father. And first, it was like this very emotional moment for him, and he's like ascending to the throne, and his coronation is happening. And then the second moment, when he comes back there, you expect him to seek advice because that's what happens in the traditional story. Right. And there's that familiar element that we talked about earlier, that thing that we expect to see. And then Coogler circumvents that by saying, no, T'Challa's pissed at his dad, and he's pissed that this is happening, and he's saying, I'm not going to stay here and die because I've got unfinished business. And that was his big heroic moment in the movie, if you ask me. It wasn't because he's expected to do all the combat scenes. He's expected to accept the invitation, or not really invitation, but challenge from Killmonger. His big heroic moment was saying, no, I've got other things to do. I'm going to go do the virtuous thing, save our nation, and make sure that Wakanda's like true mission is fulfilled. Yeah. So I loved that scene. It was great.
Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah. Let's talk about the world building itself. Just the art direction, the visuals for the film, because the film is incredibly striking. The art direction is just out of this world. They just pulled no punches with the art direction for the film. Like, the look of the film is so incredibly beautiful and cultural and just straight up African. Like, it's fantastic to see that sort of imagery again in one of these films. The music was traditional and legitimate, and everything was just so what's the word I'm looking for? Honest. And it very much just paid homage to the culture that it was portraying. Nothing felt phony. Everything felt legitimate and honest and straightforward. And yeah, it was really cool.
It's hard enough, right? Yeah, it's hard enough to do that from a standpoint of mixing kind of like two timelines.
Yeah,
like you see often in sci-fi kind of, and sometimes in fantasy TV shows, this like really anachronistic feel when you get some piece of technology that is implemented into something that's very rustic, and it just clashes. It clashes very very loudly, and you're like, oh, that does not fit, you know. But here you get this like really vibrant culture, and they tied it in really intelligently with little set pieces and even dialogue. You know, they fly in to Wakanda, and T'Challa comes out of I don't even know, his hovercraft, and he's talking to his family, and in his dialogue with his sister, you recognize that she's the one that's like she's cute, you know, she's the quartermaster, and she and she flips him off and goes back down. You right there, it's like a little glass shattering moment, but it's kind of funny. And they what is it called? There's a rhetorical term for it, and I'm gonna forget it right now, but anyway, it breaks it with comedy, right? It breaks that kind of like tension, and then you're like, oh, that's funny, and I understand she's the tech person, and then when you go into the lab, you see out the window the mine, and that should be the thing that really like clashes with you, because they've got trains running that are run on magnetic tracks, and this is technology that we're working toward now, but not quite there yet. But it's also in this very rustic feel of they're in a cavern and they're still in Wakanda, but underneath the Serengeti, you know?
Right. Yeah. So I have two major thoughts about both what you're talking about, like the technology versus the traditionalism of Africa and all that type of stuff. My first thought is the fact that I felt Coogler did a masterful job of blending both the traditional African clothing and culture and all that type of stuff with the technology. It didn't feel clashy. Like, this is the most technologically advanced country in the world by far, maybe the most wealthy too, and they're secluded and whatnot. But like the streets of Wakanda are dirt roads, and there's a member of the council who's got lip and ear plates, and they're not all dressed like they're in Star Trek. They're all wearing traditional colors and garbs and sandals, and yeah, it was really cool to see that, because they could have easily gone one way or the other, way too far. But Coogler's sense of direction with the art was just so succinct that, and I'm going to get into my next point very briefly, even though I felt like the technology was a little too outlandish and a little too out there for what the world was, or what the country of Wakanda was supposed to be, it felt organic within the confines of the direction of the film, which I thought was fantastic. It did feel a little too outlandish. This is a country that, despite the fact that they've got, you know, this incredibly rich source of the most, you know, valuable and indestructible metal on the planet, because they've been so secluded and so isolated forever, I never really understood how they had the knowledge to build what they built with it in the first place. I know I'm familiar with the comics and the fact that like Wakanda has spies all over the world. They established that in both Civil War and in this movie. And in the comics, a lot of what those war dog spies were supposed to do is a lot of industrial espionage. So
yeah, reconnaissance.
They'll do like reconnaissance, and they'll bring back technology and stuff like that, and then Wakanda will take what they learned from that and they'll expound upon it tenfold. And in some cases, they've also even done some sabotage to stop the rest of the world from becoming more technologically advanced. There was no allusion towards that in this film, so it did feel weird that Wakanda was just so radically, insanely advanced. I could see, like, if it wasn't vibranium, if it was like a spaceship full of vibranium that had crash landed instead of just like a meteorite itself, because then they would have the technology to initially build off of or something like that. It wouldn't have been true to the comics. It would have been probably cartoonish and outlandish, but for me, the technology was just way too out there. Like nanotechnology, super suits, and magnetic levitation trains, and super powerful weapons, and airships that made like hover carriers in the Avengers look like Tinker Toys. Like it was a little too much, but and this is what we're talking about right now is the 4%. You know, Rotten Tomatoes gives Black Panther 96. This is one, I think, in a very valid, it could be even maybe 2 of the 4%, because the technology aspect threw me for a loop, and I think you're right. It's because they don't really touch on it. Like, it could be easily written off with a few more extras in the lab that were working constantly, and you would have been thinking that entire time, like, oh, they're constantly in Wakanda, like, thinking up new things. Right. But there's even another line later on in the movie where they're talking about, oh, and your tech savvy sister is the one that's leading your technological revolution. No, and that's where he kind of like it's validated then that it's really a few people that are contributing to the technological wealth of Wakanda, and that makes you kind of think in your head like, I don't know, it's less plausible. But, you know, as viewers, we're expected to suspend our disbelief, right? We're expected to go into this movie and say, like, okay, yeah, I know people can't have, like, magic armor that, you know, randomly appears from a necklace and whatever, but I don't know. Well, I mean, in the case of, like, Tony Stark, we established early on that he's a super genius. Like, he's a genius, which establishes kind of what Shuri had going on, where she's just, you know, naturally in tune with innovation and engineering. That's fine. Tony Stark also had limitless wealth and planet-wide resources and mentors and other people to work from, and he basically was the product of like a global innovating and engineering community. That makes a little bit more sense for me, that Tony Stark having all this potential and all these resources and all this, basically being a lifelong student of engineering, could potentially put together a suit like that knowing what he knows. Is there like a really good engineering school in Wakanda? And if so, like who started it? Who taught Shuri how to do all this? How did they learn how to mine the vibranium and turn it into nanotechnology armors and holographic things that let them remotely control cars that they don't even actually have in Wakanda? Like all that type of stuff. Like it was a little too far with the technology, and it almost pulled me out of the movie, if not for the great writing and great world building otherwise. So.
And I thought with the the driving in particular in the pilot scene, I'm thinking in my head like, that's not the wild of technology. What's wild about it is the nanobot kind of vibranium thing, because otherwise it's just AR. They're able to tap in, or I guess it's not really is it virtual reality? It is virtual reality in that sense.
Kind of,
but. Yeah, but so the technology is sort of here now, but we don't have the nanobot thing to make it feel and kind of like to make that a more realistic thing. Right. So I understand where they're getting, and I'm sure if Black Panther 2, they'll retcon that, and it'll be Shuri in one of the opening scenes talking to a school full of children and talking about how nanobots exist from vibranium. Yeah. And then done. And in 10 seconds, I'll be satisfied for that kind of thing. And that's all it will take with a retcon. But there's something to be said about the technology and kind of where did that come from and all that. I will say one of my favorite things about this movie, though, and it's me kind of, I'll take a quick right turn here. I liked that Marvel movies recently have really been buying into the camp. Like we saw it with that Kiwi flavor in Ragnarok, and we all loved it. Ragnarok, I would say, is number 4. Like right up there in terms of Marvel movies for me. Potentially even in the top 3. I don't know what I would take out, but anyway, this movie had comedy, but it didn't buy into the campiness that other Marvel movies bought into. Yeah. So all of the big comedic like one-liners and big kind of funny moments happen through family interactions, which I find to be more plausible. I am much more likely to joke with and make stupid jokes with like people that I know very well, or most likely family members. And so all those lines between T'Challa and Shuri, and those are most of the one-liners, like when she flips him off, or when she says, "I call them sneakers," and everybody's just busting out laughing in the movie theater, and I'm going, I'm expecting that in a Marvel movie, but there's context for it, and I love that.
Yeah. It did have some of that Marvel silliness, though. I mean, they had the Jabari tribe with M'Baku, the great white ape guy. He was definitely comic relief. But none of it stuck out as being like grating, or it didn't pull you out of the movie whenever a dumb joke was made. And why that works with Ragnarok is because they set the tone early on. Like, they've kind of gradually built Thor from being like this Shakespearean, very like, Shakespearean prose, very serious character, into kind of being more mellowed out and more of like a bro as he spends more and more time with humanity and he chills out. So they couldn't have made Ragnarok the second of the Thor movies, or even before they made Age of Ultron or anything, because there hadn't been that evolution of the character into something relaxed enough to do that sort of thing. But yeah, they building up to that sort of tone with Thor, and Ragnarok itself set that tone very early on, so everything felt okay and organic. Like, there was a lot of jokes, but none of them were like, there was no like record scratch jokes or anything like that. Nothing that stopped me dead in its tracks. And the same vein, it was like that with Black Panther, where there was a lot of humor, but the humor matched the tone of the film, and that's why it worked. It's, again, right to Ryan Coogler's credit, it's just brilliantly written. Like, he's just got a masterful handle on tone and world building and what works and what doesn't work, both in terms of screenwriting and directing as actors. Like, there's not a flawed performance in this entire movie. It's like dynamite.
There are very intricate C plots and D plots. I think if you look into, and I only picked up on a couple of them, and I'm looking forward to picking up on more when I go back because I'm sure they're there. But there are a few that like stand out. Just in terms of like tertiary characters having conflict between one another that don't necessarily affect the plot but are important to like small machinations of the level of characters just above them, and eventually that all influences either Killmonger or T'Challa, and they've got to figure out how to kind of like navigate that world. Right. And it's because of something that happens with this like random side character, and that's really hard to do when you're writing a story.
Yeah.
It's a great movie.
Yeah, it's a great movie. Maybe that's a good note to end on. It's a great movie.
Yeah. That's why people love Black Panther.
And that is why people love Black Panther.
If you're interested, skip ahead to this point.
Retroactively go back in time and just skip to this point. Yeah. So I think it covers all the bases. We might do another video because there's so much here to talk about, and it's one of those movies that, unlike some other recent blockbusters that have come out, the more I think about this one, the more I like it more and more, and I keep remembering more significant details and little nuances here and there. And it's, again, I love these Marvel movies, but it's kind of rare that this happens with these movies. A lot of them have been kind of one and done. A lot of them have been better than average and have been worthy of being, purchased or reviewing multiple times. But this one, I think, is going to be one of those that's like, I'm going to watch it a lot of times when I buy it, and then revisit it a couple times a year forever. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, definitely one worth revisiting. Yeah. I only do that with a few, like Guardians or Iron Man, or the ones that I mentioned at the top. So.
Yeah. So thank you to everybody for listening to us ramble for about 40 minutes. I've had a good time talking about it. I love this movie. I think it's great. Hopefully you've all seen it and you enjoyed it as well. Let us know what you think about it in the comments down below. And if you like us talking about movies, because we really, really like talking about movies. And we usually do it while we're drinking. I like drinking. Leave a comment and like this video and tell your friends about it. So
please.
Yeah. This is a movie that desperately warrants and asks for conversation and debate. So let this video be one of millions and millions of catalysts for such conversations and debates happening around the planet right now.
I was going to say, if nothing else, I just want to talk about it more. And
I just want to talk about
this. This is already fulfilling that, and I'd like to continue that in the comments. So let us know what you think.
Yeah, exactly. So cheers, everybody. Thanks.
Cheers.